1878. Archibald Philip Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery, who would go on to be British Prime Minister in 1894, marries Hannah de Rothschild, the daughter of Baron Meyer de Rothschild. The marriage produces 4 children: Harry Primrose, Lord Darnley, later 6th Earl of Rosebery, the Honourable Neil Primrose, Lady Sybil Primrose, and Lady Margaret Primrose. 1879. Lionel de Rothschild dies. 1880. Rothschild agents begin fomenting a series of pogroms predominantly in Russia, but also in Poland, Bulgaria and Romania. These pogroms result in the slaughter of thousands of Jews, causing approximately 2 million to flee, mainly to New York, but also to Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston and Los Angeles. However, some are assisted with Rothschild money to begin settling in Palestine. The reason these pogroms were initiated was to create a large Jewish base in America, who when they arrived, would be educated to register as Democrat voters. Some 20 years later, this would result in a massive Democratic power base in the United States and be used to elect Rothschild frontmen such as Woodrow Wilson to the presidency, to carry out the bidding of the Rothschilds. In America, John Swinton, then the preeminent New York journalist, was the guest of honor at a banquet given him by the leaders of his craft. Someone who knew neither the press nor Swinton offered a toast to the independent press. Swinton outraged his colleagues by replying, "There is no such thing, at this date of the world's history, in America, as an independent press. You know it and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper, before 24 hours my occupation would be gone. The business of the journalists is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it and I know it, and what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. 1881. President James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States who lasted only 100 days, states 2 weeks before he is assassinated, "Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate." On March 13th, the Tsar of Russia, Alexander I, is assassinated in St. Petersburg, following several assassination attempts that began in 1866, less than a year after President Lincoln's victory in the American Civil War. Edmund James de Rothschild has a son, Maurice de Rothschild. 1883. After 6,000 feet of tunnel in the Channel Tunnel project has been excavated, the British government halts the project, citing the fact that it would be a threat to Britain's security. 1885. Nathaniel Rothschild, son of Lionel de Rothschild, becomes the first Jewish peer and takes the title of Lord Rothschild. 1886. The French Rothschild Bank, de Rothschild FREs, obtains substantial amounts of Russia's oil fields and forms the Caspian and Black Sea Petroleum Company, which quickly becomes the world's second largest oil producer. 1887. Edward Albert Sassoon, grandson of Rothschild opium monopolist David Sassoon, marries Aileen Caroline de Rothschild, the granddaughter of Jacob, James, Meyer Rothschild. Aileen Caroline's father, Gustav, together with his brother, Alphonse, took over the Rothschilds' French arm following their father Jacob's death. The Rothschilds financed the amalgamation of the Kimberley diamond mines in South Africa. They subsequently become the biggest shareholders of this company, De Beers, and mine precious stones in Africa and India. 1888. Nomi Halfan, future wife of Maurice de Rothschild, is born. 1891. The British Labour leader makes the following statement on the subject of the Rothschilds: "This blood-sucking crew has been the cause of untold mischief and misery in Europe during the present century, and has piled up its prodigious wealth chiefly through fomenting wars between states which ought never to have quarrelled. Whenever there is trouble in Europe, wherever rumours of war circulate and men's minds are distraught with fear of change and calamity, you may be sure that a hook-nosed Rothschild is at his games somewhere near the region of the disturbance." Comments like this worry the Rothschilds, and towards the end of the 1800s they purchase Reuters news agencies so they can exercise some control over the media. 1895. Edmund James de Rothschild, the youngest son of Jacob, James, Meyer Rothschild, visits Palestine to see the Jewish colonies he funded as a result of the Rothschild-engineered pogroms in Russia, Poland, Bulgaria and Romania. He is impressed and vows to continue to supply funds to these colonies in furtherance of the long-term Rothschild objective of creating a Rothschild-owned Jewish state. 1897. The Rothschilds found their Zionist Congress to promote Zionism. Zionism is portrayed as a political movement seeking to secure a homeland for the Jews, but is in reality a conspiracy to bring the entire world under a world government administered and controlled by Jews, and in particular, the Rothschilds. The first meeting of the Zionist Congress is arranged to take place in Munich. However, due to opposition from local Jews, this meeting has to be moved to Basel, Switzerland, and takes place on 29 August. The meeting is chaired by Ashkenazi Jew, Theodor Herzl, who would go on to state in his diaries, "It is essential that the sufferings of Jews come worst. This will assist in realization of our plans. I have an excellent idea that I shall induce anti-Semites to liquidate Jewish wealth. The anti-Semites will assist us thereby in that they will strengthen the persecution and oppression of Jews. The anti-Semites shall be our best friends." Hexagram. Herzl is subsequently elected president of the Zionist organization, which adopts the Rothschild red hexagram as their Zionist flag, which 51 years later will end up on the flag of Israel. At this conference, Chaim Weizmann, who would go on to become its head, declares there are no English, French, German or American Jews, but only Jews living in England, France, Germany or America. Edward Henry Harriman becomes a director of the Union Pacific Railroad and goes on to take control of the Southern Pacific Railroad. This is all financed by the Rothschilds. 1898. At the World Zionist Congress in July, Max Mandelstam makes the following statement: "The Jews energetically reject the idea of fusion with the other nationalities and cling firmly to their historical hope of world empire." Pope Leo XII states the following on the subject of usury: "The charging of interest on money on the one hand, there is the party which holds the power because it holds the wealth, which has in its grasp all labor and all trade, which manipulates for its own benefit and its own purposes all the sources of supply, and which is powerfully represented in the councils of state itself. On the other side there is the needy and powerless multitude, sore and suffering. Rapacious usury, which, although more than once condemned by the Church, is nevertheless under a different form but with the same guilt, still practiced by avaricious and grasping men. So that a small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the masses of the poor a yoke little better than slavery itself." Ferdinand de Rothschild dies. 1899. Due to the discovery of a vastly increasing amount of wealth in gold and diamonds within South Africa, the Rothschilds through their agents Lord Alfred Milner and Cecil Rhodes sent 400,000 British soldiers over there to fight against the enemy, which consist of 30,000 Boer farmers with rifles who would rather not leave their own land. It is during this so-called war that the concentration camp is invented, when the British rounded up anyone sympathetic to the Boers, which included women and children, and placed them in unsanitary, fever-ridden camps. The Rothschild British Army go on to win this war and thus the vast wealth in gold and diamonds, for the Rothschilds. Indeed, in a speech he gave on October 30, 1937, Rear Admiral Henry Hamilton Beamish had the following to say on the subject of the Boer War. The Boer War occurred 37 years ago. Boer means farmer. Many criticized a great power like Britain for trying to wipe out the Boers. Upon making inquiry, I found all the gold and diamond mines of South Africa were owned by Jews, that Rothschild controlled gold, Samuels controlled silver, Bohm controlled other mining, and Moses controlled base metals. Anything these people touch they inevitably pollute. Stephanus Johannes Paul Kruger, the current president of the Transvaal Republic in South Africa, Stephanus Johannes Paul Kruger, would state the following this year, regarding the only way he could envision peace in South Africa if it were conceivable, to eject the Jew monopolist from this country neck and crop without incurring war with Great Britain. Then the problem of everlasting peace would be solved. 1901. The Jews from the colonies set up in Palestine by Edmund James de Rothschild, send a delegation to him which state the following: if you wish to save the Yeshava, the Jewish settlement, first take your hands from it, and for once permit the colonists to have the possibility of correcting for themselves what needs correcting. Edmund James de Rothschild is not at all pleased to receive this delegation, and he says to them, I created the Yeshava, I alone. Therefore no men, neither colonists nor organizations have the right to interfere in my plans. The Rothschild banking house in Frankfurt, Germany, M.A. von Rothschild und Esse, closes as there is no male Rothschild heir to take it on. 1902. Philippe de Rothschild is born. 1903. In August at the 6th Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, a discussion takes place regarding an offer from Britain to provide Uganda as a base for a future Jewish Zionist state. The Jews present complain they want Palestine, and then suddenly Max Nordau makes the following shocking statement regarding how the Jews will get Palestine through a stepping stone process, which would play out to the letter more than 15 years later. This is what he said: let me tell you the following words as if I were showing you the rungs of a ladder leading upward and upward. Herzl, the Zionist Congress, the English-Uganda proposition, the future World War, the peace conference where with the help of England a free and Jewish Palestine will be created. 1905. A group of Rothschild-backed Zionist Jews led by Georgy Apollonowicz Kupin attempt to overthrow the Tsar of Russia in a communist coup. They fail and are forced to flee Russia only to be given refuge in Germany. This year's Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 2. p. 497, on the subject of control of the Catholic Church, states it is a somewhat curious sequel to the attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschilds that at the present time the latter are the guardians of the papal treasure. 1906. The Rothschilds claim that due to growing instability in the region and increasing competition from Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family are Rothschild descendants through a female bloodline, own Standard Oil. They decide to sell their Caspian and Black Sea Petroleum Company to Royal Dutch Shell. This is another example of the Rothschilds trying to hide their true wealth which they are actually consolidating. 1907. Rothschild, Jacob Sif, the head of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, in a speech to the New York Chamber of Commerce, warns that unless we have a central bank with adequate control of credit resources, this country is going to undergo the most severe and far-reaching money panic in its history. Suddenly America finds itself in the middle of another financial crisis, known as the Panic of 1907, which goes on to decimate the lives of millions of Americans. 1909. Jacob Sif founds the National Advancement for the Association of the Colored People, NAP. This is done to incite black people into rioting, looting and other forms of disorder, in order to cause a rift between the black and white communities. Jewish historian Howard Sachar states the following in his book, A History of the Jews in America. In 1914, Professor Emeritus Joel Spingin of Columbia University became chairman of the NACP and recruited for its board such Jewish leaders as Jacob Sif, Jacob Ilikopf, and Rabbi Stephen Wise. Other Ashkenazi Jew co-founders included Julius Rosenthal, Lillian Wald and Rabbi Emil G. Hirsch. It would not be until over 60 years later in the 1970s that the NACP would appoint its first black president, Benjamin Hooks. Interestingly, the Jewish Talmud is the proponent of the racist Hamitic myth, a subject on which former employee of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Harold Brackman, wrote the following in his doctoral dissertation entitled, The Ebb and Flow of Conflict, The History of Black-Jewish Relations Through 1900. There is no denying that the Babylonian Talmud was the first source to read a negrophobic content into the episode by stressing Canaan's fraternal connection with Cush. The more important version of the myth, however, ingeniously ties in the origins of blackness, and of other, real and imagined negroid traits, with Noah's curse itself. According to it, Ham is told by his outraged father that, because you have abused me in the darkness of the night, your children shall be born black and ugly, because you have twisted your head to cause me embarrassment, they shall have kinky hair and red eyes, because your lips jested at my exposure, theirs shall swell, and because you neglected my nakedness, they shall go naked with their shamefully elongated male members exposed for all to see. Morris de Rothschild marries Ashkenazi Jew, Nomi Halfdan. 1911. Werner Sombart, in his book, The Jews and Modern Capitalism, states that from 1820 on, it was the age of the Rothschild, and concluded that there was only one power in Europe, and that is Rothschild. He also stated Jewish influence made the United States just what they are, that is, American. For what we call Americanism is nothing else, if we may say so, than the Jewish spirit distilled. Modern capitalism is nothing more nor less than an expression of the Jewish spirit. Capitalism was born from the money loan. Money lending contains the root idea of capitalism. Turn to the pages of the Talmud and you will find that the Jews made an art of lending money. They were taught early to look for their chief happiness in the possession of money. They fathomed all the secrets that lay hidden in money. They became lords of money and lords of the world. 1912. In the December issue of Truth magazine, George R. Conroy states of banker Jacob Sif, Mr. Sif is head of the great private banking house of Kuhn, Loeb, and Co., which represents the Rothschilds' interests on this side of the Atlantic. He has been described as financial strategist and has been for years the financial minister of the great impersonal power known as Standard Oil. He was hand in glove with the Harrimans, the Goulds, and the Rockefellers in all their railroad enterprises and has become the dominant power in the railroad and financial power of America. 1913. On March 4th, Woodrow Wilson is elected the 28th President of the United States. Shortly after he is inaugurated, he is visited in the White House by Ashkenazi Jew, Samuel Untermeyer, of law firm Guggenheim, Untermeyer, and Marshall, who tries to blackmail him for the sum of $40,000 in relation to an affair Wilson had whilst he was a professor at Princeton University, with a fellow professor's wife. President Wilson does not have the money, so Untermeyer volunteers to pay the $40,000 out of his own pocket to the woman Wilson had the affair with, on the condition that Wilson promised to appoint to the first vacancy on the United States Supreme Court a nominee to be recommended to President Wilson by Untermeyer. Wilson agrees to this. On March 31, J. P. Morgan, alleged owner of the J. P. Morgan banking empire, dies. He is thought to be the richest man in America, but his will revealed he owned only 19% of J. P. Morgan companies. The other 81%? Owned by the Rothschilds. Jacob Schiff sets up the Anti-Defamation League, as a branch of the B'nai B'rith in the United States. This organization is created for the purpose of identifying anyone who questions or challenges the unlawful actions of elitist Jews or the Rothschild global conspiracy as anti-Semitic, and against the Jewish race as a whole. Strangely enough, the same year that they do this they also set up their last and current central bank in America, the Federal Reserve. In order to get support for this from the public, they brazenly state that only a central bank could curb inflations and depressions when in fact the very idea of a central bank is to manipulate the money supply to cause this. Following the passing of the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, Congressman Charles Lindbergh states the act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The greatest crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill. It is important to note that the Federal Reserve is a private company. It is neither federal nor does it have any reserve. It is conservatively estimated that profits exceed $150 billion per year, yet the Federal Reserve has never once in its history published accounts. Some recent evidence has come forward as to who really owns the Federal Reserve, and they are the following banks: Rothschild Bank of London, Warburg Bank of Hamburg, Rothschild Bank of Berlin, Lehman Brothers of New York, Lazard Brothers of Paris, Kuhn-Lowe Bank of New York, Israel Moses Sef Banks of Italy, Goldman Sachs of New York, Warburg Bank of Amsterdam, Chase Manhattan Bank of New York. These are all Rothschild banks. 1914. The start of World War I. In this war, the German Rothschilds loan money to the Germans, the British Rothschilds loan money to the British, and the French Rothschilds loan money to the French. Furthermore, the Rothschilds have control of the three European news agencies: Wolf, 1849, in Germany, Reuters, 1851, in England, and Harvard, 1835, in France. The Rothschilds use Wolf to manipulate the German people into a fervor for war. It is around this time that the Rothschilds are rarely reported in the media, because they own the media. 1915. The Islamic Ottoman government of Turkey is overthrown by Masonic Jewish socialists, who deceptively called themselves the Young Turks. The upshot of this is a Jewish-led genocide of 2 million Christian Armenians, many of whom are tortured and have their hands cut off. Indeed, according to the British consul, there were so many severed hands, that if they were laid side by side, a highway could have been made out of them. As a result of this revolution, the man who would become known as Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, an alcoholic crypto-Jew, would rise to dictatorial power in Turkey. 1916. On June 4, Ashkenazi Jew, Louis Dimbits Brandeis is appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States by President Wilson, as per his agreed blackmail payment to Samuel Untermeyer some 3 years earlier. Justice Brandeis is also the elected leader of the Executive Committee for Zionist Affairs, a position he has held since 1914. The middle of World War I. Germany are winning the war as they are being financed by the Rothschilds to a greater extent than France, Italy and England, simply because the Rothschilds do not want to support the Tsar in Russia, and of course Russia was on the same side as France, Italy and England. Then a significant event occurs. On December 12, Germany, although they were winning the war and not one foreign soldier had set foot on their soil, offers armistice to Britain with no requirement of reparations. The Rothschilds are anxious to make sure this is not accepted by the British, as they have a few cards left up their sleeve in relation to what they initiated this war for. So, whilst the British are considering Germany's offer, Rothschild agent Louis Brandeis sends a Zionist delegation from America to Britain to promise to bring America into the war on the side of the British, provided the British agree to give the land of Palestine to the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds wanted Palestine to protect the great business interests they had in the East. They also desired their own state in that area along with their own military, which they could use as an aggressor to any state that threatened those interests. The British subsequently agree to the deal for Palestine, and the Zionists in London contact their counterparts in America and inform them of this fact. Suddenly all the major newspapers in America that up to that point had been pro-German turn on Germany, running propaganda pieces to manipulate the American public against the Germans, such as, "German soldiers are killing Red Cross nurses," and, "German soldiers are cutting off babies' hands." Interestingly, Woodrow Wilson is re-elected president this year, the slogan of his campaign being, "Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war." 1917. As a result of Germany's offer of peace, the Rothschild war machine goes into total overdrive in America, spreading anti-German propaganda throughout the American media, which leads to President Wilson, under the instructions of the Jewish American Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, reneging on his promise to the electorate and taking America into World War I on April 6. As per the Rothschild promise to the British, to take America into the war, they decide they want something in writing from the British to prove that they will uphold their side of the bargain. The British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, a Jew, therefore drafts a letter which is commonly known as the Balfour Declaration, which is reprinted below. Foreign Office, November 2, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to, and approved by, the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour. The Rothschilds order the execution by the Jewish Bolsheviks they control, of Tsar Nicholas I and his entire family in Russia, even though the Tsar had already abdicated on March 2nd. This is to get control of the country and an act of revenge for Tsar Alexander I blocking their world government plan in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna, and Tsar Alexander I siding with President Abraham Lincoln in 1864. It is extremely important for them to slaughter the entire family, including women and children, in order to make good on the promise to do so made by Nathan Meyer Rothschild in 1815. This act is a show of power play and defiance by the Jews to the rest of the world. United States Congressman Oscar Callaway informs Congress that J.P. Morgan is a Rothschild front and has taken control of the American media industry. He states in March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests, the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interest, and their subsidiary organizations, got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought, to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers. 1918. The real purpose of communism becomes apparent less than a year after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the stealing of the wealth of the people, especially the Rothschilds' favorite, gold, for the benefit of the state which is of course now owned by the Rothschild family, and administered by Jews. This is highlighted by the following dispatch from Petrograd reported in the New York Times on January 30. The People's Commissaries have decreed a state monopoly of gold. Churches, museums and other public institutions are required to place their gold articles at the disposal of the state. Gold articles belonging to private persons must be handed over to the state. Informants will receive 1/3 of the value of the articles. In March of this year, Lenin makes a statement against anti-Semitism which is put onto phonograph record and circulated around the country, as part of a massive campaign to stifle the burgeoning counter-revolutionary movement against the Jews. In April, the London Times correspondent to Russia, Robert Wilton, produces a table showing the ethnic structure of the 384 commissars in the new Russian government. These commissars include 2 Negroes, 13 Russians, 15 Chinamen, 22 Armenians, and more than 300 Jews. Of those Jews, 264 had come to Russia from the United States since the downfall of the imperial government. The president of the University of Wisconsin, Charles R. Van Hise, delivers an address entitled, "The Foundation of a New World Order," to the Wisconsin State Convention of the League to Enforce Peace. During this address he states the world has become one body, and no great member of it can proceed independently of the other members. They must act together, and this is possible only through formal treaty covenants. 1919. In January, Jew, Karl Liebknecht, Sephardic Jew, Rosa Luxemburg, are killed as they attempt to lead another Rothschild-funded communist coup, this time in Berlin, Germany. On January 18, the Versailles Peace Conference commences, to decide reparations that the Germans are required to pay to the victors following the end of World War I. A delegation of 117 Jews headed up by Ashkenazi Jew, Bernard Baruch, who would go on to state to a select committee of the United States Congress, "I probably had more power than perhaps any other man did in the war. Doubtless that is true. Bring up the subject of the promise of Palestine for them." At this point the Germans realized why America had turned on them and under whose influence, the Rothschilds. The Germans, naturally, felt they had been betrayed by their Jewish population. This is because, at the time the Rothschilds made their deal with Britain for Palestine, in exchange for bringing America into the war, Germany was the most friendly country in the world towards the Jews. Indeed, the German Emancipation Edict of 1820 guaranteed Jews in Germany all civil rights enjoyed by Germans. Also, Germany was the only country in Europe which did not place restrictions on Jews, even giving them refuge when they had to flee from Russia after their first attempted communist coup failed in 1905. Nevertheless, Palestine is confirmed as a Jewish homeland, and whilst its handover to the Rothschilds takes place, it is to remain under the control of Britain as the Rothschilds control Britain. At the time less than 1% of the population of Palestine is Jewish. Interestingly, the host of the Versailles Peace Conference is its Jewish boss, Baron Edmund de Rothschild. Indeed, in his book, The Inside Story of the Peace Conference, Emile Joseph Dillon states the following of the Versailles Peace Conference. It may seem amazing to some readers, but it is not the less a fact that a considerable number of delegates to the peace conference at Versailles believed that the real influences behind the Anglo-Saxon people were Jews. The formula into which this policy was thrown by the members of the conference, whose countries it affected, and who regarded it as fatal to the peace of Eastern Europe, ends thus: henceforth the world will be governed by the Anglo-Saxon peoples, who, in turn, are swayed by their Jewish elements. Furthermore, the Rothschilds use this conference to obtain the German-owned railway rights in Palestine and give them control over the nation's infrastructure. On May 30th, a spin-off meeting from this so-called peace conference is held, also chaired by Baron Edmund de Rothschild, at the Hotel Majestic in Paris, where it is decided that an organization be set up to advise, control, what governments do. This body is called the Institute of International Affairs, which would subsequently metamorphosize into ARMS. The British Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIA, in 1920, and its American counterpart, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, in 1921. Both of these bodies are to be controlled by the Rothschilds. Finally, the Rothschilds also use the Versailles Peace Conference to set up their second overt attempt at world government, which they promote under the pretext of ending all wars, which they of course create. They call this the League of Nations. Fortunately, this would not be accepted by enough countries, and would therefore fade away. But before it did, the future president of the World Zionist Congress, Nahum Sokolow, would state the following of it: the League of Nations is a Jewish idea. We created it after a fight of 25 years. On March 29, the Times of London reports the following on the Bolsheviks in Russia. One of the curious features of the Bolshevist movement is the high percentage of non-Russian elements among its leaders. Of the 20 or 30 commissaries, or leaders, who provide the central machinery of the Bolshevist movement, not less than 75% were Jews. It is reported that the Rothschilds are angry with the Russians because they were not prepared to allow them to form a central bank within their nation. They therefore gathered groups of Jewish spies and sent them into Russia to drum up a revolution for the benefit of the common man, which was actually a takeover of Russia by Rothschild-controlled Jewish elite. Indeed, one of these leading Jewish spies, Leon Trotsky, even used to play chess with Baron Rothschild whilst he was in Vienna. These Jewish spies were, in age-old deceptive Ashkenazi crypto-Jew tradition, given Russian names. For example, Trotsky was a leading member of the first group and his original name was Bronstein. These groups were sent to areas throughout Russia to incite riots and rebellion. The Jewish Post International Edition, week ending January 24, 1991, confirms Vladimir Lenin was Jewish. He was a crypto-Jew, and was born Vladimir Nikolaev. Lenin is on record as having stated the establishment of a central bank is 90% of communizing a nation. These Jewish, Rothschild-funded Bolsheviks would go on in the course of history to slaughter 60 million Christians and non-Jews in Soviet-controlled territory. Indeed, the author Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his work, Gulag Archipelago, Volume 2, affirms that Jews created and administered the organized Soviet concentration camp system in which these tens of millions of Christians and non-Jews died. On page 79 of this book he even names the administrators of this, the greatest killing machine in the history of the world. They are Aaron Solz, Yaakov Rapoport, Lazar Kogan, Matvey Berman, Henryk Yagoda, and Naftali Frenkel. All 6 are Jews. In 1970 Solzhenitsyn would be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature. Indeed, in April, George Peter Wilson, of the London Globe, wrote an article which contained the following definition of Bolshevism. Bolshevism is the dispossession of the Christian nations of the world to such an extent that no capital will remain in the hands of the Christians, that all Jews may jointly hold the world in their hands and reign wherever they choose. On July 23, Scotland Yard report the following to the American Secretary of State: there is now definite evidence that Bolshevism is an international movement controlled by Jews. Communications are passing between the leaders in America, France, Russia and England, with a view toward concerted action. On June 19, Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes is quoted with the following statement in the Saturday Evening Post: the Montefiores have taken Australia for their own, and there is not a gold field or a sheep run from Tasmania to New South Wales that does not pay them a heavy tribute. They are the real owners of the Antipodean continent. What is the good of our being a wealthy nation, if the wealth is all in the hands of German Jews? N.M. Rothschild and Sons are given a permanent role to fix the world's daily gold price. This takes place in the City of London offices, daily at 1,100 hours, in the same room until 2004. (1920). Winston Churchill, whose mother, Jenny Jacobson Jerome, was Jewish, meaning he is Jewish under Israeli immigration law, as he was born of a Jewish mother, writes the following in an article on page 5 of the Illustrated Sunday Herald, dated February 8: some people like Jews and some do not. But no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are beyond all question the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. And it may well be that this same astounding race may at the present time be in the actual process of producing another system of morals and philosophy, as malevolent as Christianity was benevolent, which, if not arrested, would shatter irretrievably all that Christianity has rendered possible. From the days of Spartacus way short to those of Karl Marx, and down to Trotsky, Russia, Belagun, Hungary, pre-crypto-Jew name, Cohen, Rosa Luxemburg, Germany, and Emma Goldman, United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality, has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international, and for the most part atheistic Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, subsequently revealed as a Jew, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. In the September 10 edition of The American Hebrew, it is stated the Bolshevist revolution in Russia was the work of Jewish brains, of Jewish dissatisfaction, of Jewish planning, whose goal is to create a new order in the world. What was performed in so excellent a way in Russia, thanks to Jewish brains, and because of Jewish dissatisfaction, and by Jewish planning, shall also, through the same Jewish mental and physical forces, become a reality all over the world. The Cause of World Unrest, published this year, H. A. Gwynne, contributes an introduction in which he states the following in earlier history. Kings, princes, governors stood between the masses and their exploiters. Roughly speaking, the people were prevented by established authority from being victimized. Today all that is changed, and we now live in an age which will be known, perhaps, in history as the age of the exploitation of the people. The pages of this book will trace the threads of a conspiracy engineered by people whose main object has been to destroy utterly anything, kings, governments, or institutions, which might stand between them and the people they would exploit. The main outline of the contents of this book is, in brief, that there has been for centuries a hidden conspiracy, chiefly Jewish, whose objects have been and are to produce revolution, communism and anarchy, by means of which they hope to arrive at the hegemony of the world by establishing some sort of despotic rule. Also this year, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion is published in England, having first been deposited in the British Museum in 1905. This document is the blueprint for the domination of the world by Jews, and is said to have formed the minutes of the First World Zionist Congress held in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897. It is immediately slammed as anti-Semitic by the Jews, who claim it is a forgery, but interestingly will not go as far as to call it a fake. The only way to determine if this plan for Jewish domination of the world is real, is to look at the evidence and establish whether the Jews have dominated the world, or have made clear efforts to do so. There is more than enough evidence for the former to be the case, and in fact this is what Henry Ford said about the Protocols, 85 years ago. In 1921 the only statement I care to make about the Protocols is that they fit in with what is going on. They are 16 years old, and they have fitted the world situation up to this time. They fit it now. 1921. In her book, published this year, World Revolution or the Plot Against Civilization, noted historian, Nestor Webster, states the following of the Jews: since the earliest times it is as the exploiter that the Jew has been known amongst his fellow men of all races and creeds. Moreover, he has persistently shown himself ungrateful. The Jews have always formed a rebellious element in every state. Under the orders of Jacob Sif, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, is founded by Ashkenazi Jews, Bernard Baruch and Colonel Edward Mandelhaus. Sif gave his orders prior to his death in 1920, as he knew an organization in America needed to be set up to select politicians to carry on the Rothschild conspiracy. Indeed, the formation of the CFR was actually agreed in a meeting on May 30, 1919 at the Hotel Majestic in Paris, France. The CFR membership at the start is approximately 1,000 people in the United States. This membership includes the heads of virtually every industrial empire in America, all the American-based international bankers, and the heads of all their tax-free foundations. In essence, all those people who would provide the capital required for anyone who wished to run for Congress, the Senate or the presidency. The first job of the CFR is to gain control of the press. This task is given to John D. Rockefeller, who sets up a number of national news magazines such as Life and Time. He finances the Jew, Samuel Newhouse, to buy up and establish a chain of newspapers all across the country, and another Jew, Eugene Meyer, who would go on to buy up many publications such as the Washington Post, Newsweek, and the Weekly Magazine. The idea of controlling the press is not simply to censor news the Rothschilds don't want you to hear. It is primarily to be used as an education tool to condition the public by emphasizing what news is important and what news isn't. A perfect example of this is a newspaper which runs lead stories about the shenanigans of whatever flavor of the month celebrity they choose, yet bury within the inside pages some brief account of an ongoing war that will overtly or covertly have an effect on each and every one of us. Another example of this is putting more and more emphasis on sport as opposed to news. The CFR also needed to get control of radio, television and the motion picture industry. This task is split amongst the international bankers from Kuhn Loeb, Goldman Sachs, the Warburgs, and the Leymans. Interestingly, the Jewish Encyclopedica Judaica would have the following to say on this subject: all the large Hollywood companies, with the exception of United Artists, were founded and controlled by Jews. Finally, the CFR needed to control what was being taught in the schools, and the task was given to the Carnegies. In Germany, Jacob Klatskin, a Jewish political Zionist ideologist in Germany at the time, where incidentally the Jews of Germany were enjoying full political and civil rights, makes the following provocative statement, hoping it will undermine the Jewish community in Germany and make them flee to Palestine: "We Jews are aliens. A Jew can never be a loyal German. Whoever calls the foreign land his fatherland is a traitor to the Jewish people." 1922. President Theodore Roosevelt, who died in 1919, is quoted in the March 27 edition of the New York Times with the following statement: "These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control a majority of newspapers, and the columns of these newspapers to club into submission or drive out of public office officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government." The reason the New York Times ran this article was due to the mayor of New York, John Hylan, who had been reported in the same paper the previous day, March 26, with the following statement: "The warning of Theodore Roosevelt has much timeliness today, for the real menace of our republic is this invisible government which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. It seizes in its long and powerful tentacles our executive officers, our legislative bodies, our schools, our courts, our newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection." To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interest and a small group of powerful banking houses generally referred to as international bankers. This little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control a majority of newspapers and magazines in this country. In his book, The Juice, published this year, noted historian, Hilaire Belloc, states the following in relation to the increasing phenomenon of the crypto-Jew. Take the particular trick of false names. It seems to us particularly odious. We think when we show our contempt for those who use this subterfuge that we are giving them no more than they deserve. It is a meanness which we associate with criminals and vagabonds, a piece of crawling and sneaking. Men whose race is universally known, will unblushingly adopt a false name as a mask, and after a year or two pretend to treat it as an insult if their original and true name be used in its place. He goes on to reveal how some Jews did not need to change their name as they simply intermarried with the aristocracy of England, when he states the Jew might almost be called a British agent upon the continent of Europe and still more in the Near and Far East. He was admitted to every institution in the state, a prominent member of his nation became chief officer of the English executive, and, an influence more subtle and penetrating, marriages began to take place, wholesale, between what had once been the aristocratic territorial families of this country and the Jewish commercial fortunes. After 2 generations of this, with the opening of the 20th century, those of the great territorial English families in which there was no Jewish blood were the exception. In nearly all of them was the stain more or less marked, in some of them so strong that though the name was still an English name and the tradition those of a purely English lineage of the long past, the physique and character had become wholly Jewish, and the members of the family were taken for Jews whenever they traveled in countries where the gentry had not yet suffered or enjoyed the admixture. 1924. Joseph Stalin, a Georgian, becomes Premier of the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin's real name is Jugashvili, which translates from Georgian as, son of a Jew. In the Georgian language, Shvli means son of, and Juga means Jew. Stalin also has 3 wives in his lifetime: Ekaterina Svanidze, Kedya Avija, and Rosa Kaganovich, all of them Jewesses. Interestingly, Stalin passes a law during his premiership that resulted in anyone found guilty of anti-Semitism being sentenced to death. On May 10, J. Edgar Hoover is made director of the Bureau of Investigation, BOI, which will become the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in 1935. He would remain its director until his death in 1972. Hoover was a homosexual, and during some point in his career he was photographed engaged in homosexual acts with Associate FBI Director Clyde Tolson, his lifelong companion for more than 40 years, who inherited his estate upon his death. These photos were obtained for the Anti-Defamation League, AD, through the mafia run by Jewish Don Mylansky, for the purposes of blackmailing Hoover. In his book, You Gentiles, Morris Samuel states the following of his people: the Jews, we are the destroyers and will remain the destroyers. Nothing you can do will meet our demands and needs. We will forever destroy because we want a world of our own. Since 1922, Morris Samuel worked as secretary to Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the World Zionist Movement. In the January 17th issue of The Jewish Courier, it is stated Jews may adopt the customs and language of the countries where they live, but they will never become part of the native population. In her book, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, published this year, Nesta Webster states the following of the Jewish religion: the Jewish conception of the Jews as the chosen people who must eventually rule the world forms indeed the basis of rabbinical Judaism. The Jewish religion now takes its stand on the Talmud rather than on the Bible. Edmund de Rothschild establishes the Palestine Jewish Colonization Association, PICA, which acquires more than 125,000 acres of land. He goes on to establish numerous business ventures there, including the founding of Israel's wine industry. On July 1st, as he leaves the Shezod Hospital in Jerusalem, Dr. Yaakov Yisrael is assassinated by Zionist Avera Umtehomi. This is as a result of his organization of a meeting between a delegation of Orthodox leaders and a group of Arab leaders headed by King Abdullah. Dr. Dian was a promoter of peace with the veteran Arab residents of the Holy Land, the direct opposite of what the Zionists wanted. 1925. This year's Jewish Encyclopedia states of the existence of Ashkenazi Jews, who represent approximately 90% of so-called world Jewry, with the startling admission that the so-called enemy of the Jews, Esau, also known as Edom, see Genesis 36:1, now actually represents the Jewish race, when on page 42 of Volume V it is stated Edom is in modern Jewry. On March 19th, the British manufacturer, Walter Crick, is quoted in the Northampton Daily Echo as having made the following statement: Jews can destroy by means of finance. Jews are international. Control of credits in this country is not in the hands of the English, but of Jews. It has become the biggest danger the British Empire ever had to face. On April 1st, the Jew, Lord Arthur James Balfour, he of the infamous Balfour Declaration, gives a speech as guest of honor at the inauguration of the Hebrew University at Mount Skippus, Jerusalem, Israel. He goes on to tour around Palestine, where he is greeted enthusiastically by the Jewish population, whilst the Arabs welcome him with black flags. On December 3rd, in the London Morning Post, George Bernard Shaw, who incidentally won the Nobel Prize for Literature this year, had the following to say on the subject of the Jew: this is the real enemy. The invader from the East, the Druze, the ruffian, the Oriental parasite, in a word the Jew. 1926. N. M. Rothschild & Sons refinance the Underground Electric Railways Company of London Limited, which has a controlling interest in the entire London Underground transport system. David Sarnoff, a Jew, launches the first United States radio chain in as a service of a car. Sarnoff will go on to be heavily involved in the development of color television and build NBC into one of the big three TV networks. Morris de Rothschild has a son, Edmund de Rothschild. 1927. On October 28, the Jewish Tribune of New York states in an article Masonry is based on Judaism. Eliminate the teachings of Judaism from the Masonic ritual and what is left? Also speaking on this subject, the well-known Rabbi, Isaac Wise, states Freemasonry is a Jewish establishment, whose history, grades, official appointments, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from beginning to end. 1928. William S. Paley, a Jew, founds CBS Radio and goes on to build it into a multi-billion-dollar TV empire. On page 572 of June 1 ST's Rothschild-owned publication, La Revue de Paris, a letter to Karl Marx from Baruch Levy is reprinted, an extract of which reads as follows: The Jewish people as a whole will be its own Messiah. It will attain world dominion by the dissolution of other races, by the abolition of frontiers, the annihilation of monarchy, and by the establishment of a world republic in which the Jews will everywhere exercise the privilege of citizenship. In this new world order, the children of Israel will furnish all the leaders without encountering opposition. The governments of the different peoples forming the world republic will fall without difficulty into the hands of the Jews. It will then be possible for the Jewish rulers to abolish private property, and everywhere to make use of the resources of the state. Thus will the promise of the Talmud be fulfilled, in which is said that when the Messianic time is come, the Jews will have all the property of the whole world in their hands. 1929. In April, Rothschild, Paul Warburg sends out a secret warning to his friends that a collapse and nationwide depression has been planned for later this year. It is certainly no coincidence that the biographies of all the Wall Street giants of that era, John D. Rockefeller, J. P. Morgan Jr., Joseph Kennedy, Bernard Baruch, et al., all marvel at the fact these people got out of the stock market completely, just before the crash, and put their assets into cash or gold. So, as all the bankers and their friends already knew, in August the Federal Reserve began to tighten the money supply. And on October 24, the big New York bankers called in their 24-hour broker call loans. This meant that both the stockbrokers and their customers had to dump their stocks on the stock market to cover their loans, irrespective of what price they had to sell them for. As a result of this, the stock market crashed, a day that would go down in history as Black Thursday. In his book, The Great Crash 1929, John Kenneth Galbraith makes the following shocking statement: at the height of the selling frenzy, Bernard Baruch brought Winston Churchill into the visitors' gallery of the New York Stock Exchange to witness the panic and impress him with his power over the wild events on the floor. Republican Congressman Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, from 1920 to 1931, who was a staunch critic of the Jewish bankers, is quite candid as to who was responsible when he states of this crash: it was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all. Despite the claims of how the Federal Reserve would protect the country against depressions and inflation, they continued to further contract the money supply. Between 1929 and 1933, they would reduce the money supply by an additional 33%. Even Milton Friedman, the Nobel Peace Prize-winning economist, stated the following in a radio interview in January 1996: the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. In only a few weeks from the day of the crash, $3 billion of wealth vanished. Within a year, $40 billion of wealth vanished. However, it did not simply disappear, it just ended up consolidated in fewer and fewer hands, as was planned. An example of this is Joseph P. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's father. In 1929 he was worth $4 million. In 1935, following the greatest depression in America's history, that had increased to over $100 million. This is why depressions are caused. To take money out of the hands of the many for the benefit of a few. On this occasion the money would be largely spent overseas, as whilst this Great Depression was occurring, millions of American dollars was being spent on rebuilding Germany from damage sustained during World War I, in preparation for the Rothschilds' next war, World War II. Republican Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee from 1920 to 1931, would state the following in relation to this: after World War I, Germany fell into the hands of the German international bankers. Those bankers bought her and now they own her, lock, stock, and barrel. They have purchased her industries, they have mortgages on her soil, they control her production, they control all her public utilities. The international German bankers have subsidized the present government of Germany, and they have also supplied every dollar of the money Adolf Hitler has used in his lavish campaign to build up a threat to the government of Brüning. When Brüning fails to obey the orders of the German international bankers, Hitler is brought forth to scare the Germans into submission. Through the Federal Reserve Board, over $30 billion of American money has been pumped into Germany. You have all heard of the spending that has taken place in Germany. Modernistic dwellings, her great planetariums, her gymnasiums, her swimming pools, her fine public highways, her perfect factories. All this was done on our money. All this was given to Germany through the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board has pumped so many billions of dollars into Germany that they dare not name the total. Interestingly, the money pumped into Germany to build her up in preparation for World War II, is into the German Nissen banks, which are affiliated with the Rothschild-controlled Harriman interest in New York. 1930. This year, 33 years after the First World Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, the first Rothschild World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, is established in the same place, Basel, Switzerland. It is established by Charles G. Dawes, Rothschild agent and vice president under President Calvin Coolidge from 1925 to 1929, O.N.D. Young, Rothschild agent, founder of Car and chairman of General Electric from 1922 until 1939, and Hjalmar Schacht of Germany, president of the Reichsbank. The BIS is referred to by the bankers as the central bank for the central banks. To put this bank into perspective today, whereas the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank deal with governments, the BIS deals only with other central banks. All its meetings are held in secret and involve the top central bankers from around the world. For example, the former head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, would go to the BIS headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, 10 times a year for these private meetings. The BIS also has the status of a sovereign power and is immune from governmental control. A summary of this immunity is listed below. 1. Diplomatic immunity for persons and what they carry with them, that is diplomatic pouches. 2. No taxation on any transactions, including salaries paid to employees. 3. Embassy-type immunity for all buildings and/or offices operated by the BIS worldwide, including China and Mexico. 4. No oversight or knowledge of operations by any government authority, they are not audited. 5. Freedom from immigration restrictions. 6. Freedom to encrypt any and all communications of any sort. 7. Freedom from any legal jurisdiction, they even have their own police force. Georgetown professor and historian, Carroll Quigley, commented on the creation of this central bank in his 1975 book, Tragedy and Hope, as follows: the powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching plan, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. A handful of United States senators led by Henry Cabot Lodge would fight to keep the United States out of the Bank for International Settlements. However, even though the United States rejected this world central bank, the Federal Reserve still sent members to participate in its meetings in Switzerland, right up until 1994, when the United States was, officially, dragged into it. 1931. This year United States State Department papers come to light of the following. In 1917, during the Russian Revolution, M. Dendijk, the Netherlands minister in Russia at the time, informed various governments including Britain, France and the United States of the danger of communism, which he identified as overtly Jewish, when he sent them a communique, a segment of which states: the danger is now so great that I feel it my duty to call the attention of the British and all other governments to the fact that if an end is not put to Bolshevism in Russia at once, the civilization of the whole world will be threatened. This is not an exaggeration. I consider that the immediate suppression of Bolshevism is the greatest issue now before the world, not even excluding the war which is still raging, and unless, as above stated, Bolshevism is nipped in the bud immediately, it is bound to spread in one form or another over Europe and the whole world, as it is organized and worked by Jews who have no nationality and whose one object is to destroy for their own ends the existing order of things. Prominent member of the Jewish Alliance Israelite Universelle, Jeannie Zulet, states this year: the meaning of the history of the last century is that today 300 Jewish financiers, all masters of lodges, rule the world. 1933. On January 30, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. He expels the Jews as communists out of all governmental positions within Germany. Interestingly, at the time the number of Jews in Germany's government was over 20 times those in their government since the end of World War I. As a result of this expulsion, in July, the Jews hold a world conference in Amsterdam, during which they demand that Hitler reinstate every Jew back to his former position. Hitler refuses, and as a result of this, Samuel Untermyer, the Ashkenazi Jew who blackmailed President Wilson, and is now the head of the American delegation and the president of the whole conference, returns to the United States, and makes a speech on radio which was transcribed in the New York Times, on Monday, August 7, 1933. In the speech he made the following statements: the Jews are the aristocrats of the world. Our campaign is the economic boycott against all German goods, shipping and services. What we are proposing is to prosecute a purely defensive economic boycott that will undermine the Hitler regime and bring the German people to their senses by destroying their export trade on which their very existence depends. Each of you, Jew and Gentile alike, must refuse to deal with any merchant or shopkeeper who sells any German-made goods or who patronizes German ships or shipping. 2/3 of Germany's food supply would have to be imported, and could only be imported with the proceeds of what they exported. So if Germany could not export, 2/3 of Germany's population would starve, as there would be not enough food for more than 1/3 of the population. Nevertheless, Jews throughout America participate in this boycott, protesting outside and damaging any stores in which they found any products with "Made in Germany" printed on them, causing stores to have to dump these products or risk bankruptcy. Once the effects of this boycott began to be felt in Germany, the Germans began boycotting Jewish stores in the same way the Jews had done to stores selling German products in America. The Nazis and the Jews in Palestine collaborate, as they would for the next 7 years. This is because they essentially wanted the same thing. The Jews in Palestine wanted all the Jews to live in Palestine, and the Nazis wanted all Jews out of Germany. Both sides therefore sign a transfer agreement known as Havara, which permitted the transfer of Jews and all their capital from Germany to Palestine. As a result of this agreement, 60,000, approx 20% of Germany's Jews, emigrate to Palestine, and make up 15% of the Jewish population by 1939. They take with them $40 million of assets, worth approximately $600 million today, with the blessing of the Nazi regime. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, by September 1939, approximately 282,000 Jews had left Germany and 117,000 from annexed Austria. Of these, some 95,000 emigrated to the United States, 60,000 to Palestine, 40,000 to Great Britain, and about 75,000 to Central and South America, with the largest numbers entering Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Bolivia. More than 18,000 Jews from the German Reich were also able to find refuge in Shanghai, in Japanese-occupied China. At the end of 1939, about 202,000 Jews remained in Germany and 57,000 in annexed Austria, many of them elderly. Interestingly, all of these Jews who left Germany voluntarily before the Second World War even started, will go on to be known as Holocaust survivors, and entitled to reparation payments following the end of the Second World War. This is because the definition of a Holocaust survivor is as follows: any Jew who lived in a country at the time when it was 1. Under Nazi regime, 2. Under Nazi occupation, or 3. Under regime of Nazi collaborators, as well as any Jew who fled due to the above regime or occupation. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Sephardic crypto-Jew, real name Rosenfeld, orders the all-seeing eye to be placed upon all new dollar bills along with the motto, Novus Ordo Seclorum. This is Latin for, a new order of the ages, or as more commonly stated today, New World Order. Furthermore, on November 16, President Roosevelt recognizes the Bolshevik regime of Stalin in Russia without consultation with Congress, whilst 8,000 Ukrainians march in protest in New York. Roosevelt would never admit his Jewish ancestry, but he would go further than most. In the New York Times of March 14, 1935, he is quoted with the following statement: "In the distant past my ancestors may have been Jews. All I know about the origin of the Roosevelt family is that they are apparently descendants of Claes Martens and Van Roosevelt, who came from Holland." In his book, From Pharaoh to Hitler, What is a Jew? Jewish author, Bernard Joseph Brown, admits that since the Jews of today are not Israelites, they have no claim to the land of Palestine. On May 11, Chaim Nachman Bialik, a Jewish poet, widely recognized as Israel's national poet, in an address given to Jews at the Jewish University in Jerusalem, states, "Not in vain have Jews been drawn to journalism. In their hands it became a mighty weapon highly fitted to meet their needs in their war of survival." 1934. In January, staunch Zionist, Vladimir Jabotinsky, gives an update on Samuel Untermeyer's boycott of Germany when he makes the following statement: "The fight against Germany has now been waged for months by every Jewish community, on every conference, in all labor unions, and by every single Jew in the world. There are reasons for the assumption that our share of this fight is of general importance. We shall start a spiritual and material war of the whole world against Germany. Germany is striving to become once again a great nation and to recover her lost territories as well as her colonies. But our Jewish interests call for the complete destruction of Germany. Collectively and individually, the German nation is a threat to us Jews. Swiss banking's secrecy laws are reformed and it becomes an offense resulting in imprisonment for any bank employee to violate bank's secrecy. This is all in preparation for the Rothschild-engineered Second World War, in which as usual they will fund both sides. In its June 20th issue, New Britain magazine of London publishes a statement made by former British Prime Minister David Lloyd George in which he states that Britain is the slave of an international financial bloc. The article also contains the following words written by Lord Bryce: "Democracy has no more persistent and insidious foe than money power." Questions regarding Bank of England, its conduct and its objects, are not allowed by the Speaker of the House of Commons. In his book, Jews Must Live, published this year, Jewish writer Samuel Roth states of the Jews our major vice of old, as of today, is parasitism. We are a people of vultures living on the labor and the good nature of the rest of the world. But, despite our faults, we would never have done so much damage to the world if it had not been for our genius for evil leadership. Granted our parasitism. Edmund de Rothschild dies. 1935. Between 1930 and 1935, Elizabeth Dunn publishes her 4-volume set, Documents Illustrative of the History of the Slave Trade to America. This shows that Jews totally dominated the trade in African slaves to America, and at least 15 of the ships used to transport the slaves were owned by Jews, some of whom had clear and close ties to the Rothschilds. In order to deceive the authorities that no Jews were involved, they often would use an all-Gentile crew and captain. On November 6, Mao Zedong states all political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way, no guns can ever be used to command the party. Subsequently, from 1948 to 1952, 20 million political dissidents are rounded up and exterminated as they are unable to defend themselves from the Communists and China due to Mao Zedong's gun control laws. 1936. With regard to the increase in anti-Semitism in Germany, Samuel Landmann, at the time, Secretary to the World Zionist Organization, in his 1936 book, Great Britain, the Jews, and Palestine, states the following of the United States' entry into World War I: "The fact that it was Jewish help that brought USA into the war on the side of the Allies has rankled ever since in German, especially Nazi, minds, and has contributed in no small measure to the prominence which anti-Semitism occupies in the Nazi program." On October 3, Republican Congressman Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, from 1920 to 1931, is poisoned to death. This is the third assassination attempt on his life. He had suffered an earlier poisoning and had had shots fired at him. McFadden had been one of the staunchest critics of the Federal Reserve and the Jewish criminal cabal behind it. 1937. In his book, Stalin, Trotsky, or Lenin, George Marlin states if the tide of history does not turn toward communist internationalism, then the Jewish race is doomed. In other words, he's saying that the Jews are totally in charge of communist internationalism, and if the world does not turn to a new world order of Jewish communist internationalism, then the Jewish race is doomed. Interestingly, internationalism is an early incarnation of globalization. Another writer, William Joyce, an Englishman, so disgusted with Britain's subservience to the Jews that he would defect to Germany just before World War II, and broadcast a radio program from there trying to wake up the British people to the enemy in their midst, stated this year Britain and Germany, particularly with the assistance of Italy, can form against Bolshevism and international finance. Twin Jewish manifestations, a bulwark much too strong to invite attack. International finance is controlled by great Jewish moneylenders, and communism is being propagated by Jewish agitators who are at one fundamentally with the powerful capitalists of their race in desiring an international world order, which would, of course, give universal sovereignty to the only international race in existence. Indeed, on February 4, renowned historian, Hilaire Belloc, makes the following statement in G.K.'s Weekly: the propaganda of communism throughout the world, in organization and direction, is in the hands of Jewish agents. As for anyone who does not know that the Bolshevist movement in Russia is Jewish, I can only say that he must be a man who is taken in by the suppression of our deplorable press. This year, Professor Ray Kulischer, a Jew, calls for the genocide of all Germans to be the priority of worldwide Jewry when he states Germany is the enemy of Judaism and must be pursued with deadly hatred. The goal of Judaism today is a merciless campaign against all German peoples and the complete destruction of the nation. We demand a complete blockade of trade, the importation of raw materials stopped, and retaliation towards every German, woman and child. On April 28, in an article published in the Daily Express, 27-year-old Lord Victor Rothschild also demonstrates how prophetic he is when asked by reporter W. Hickey where he intended to live when the lease on his Piccadilly home ran out. He replied, "Nowhere probably, I just don't know. Not till after the war anyway." It would be 2.5 years before World War II would start, yet, naturally, he already knew the war was coming. On October 30, Rear Admiral Henry Hamilton Beamish stated the following to an assembly in New York in 1848: "The word, anti-Semitic, was invented by the Jews to prevent the use of the word, Jew. The right word for them is, Jew. I implore all of you to be accurate, call them Jews. There is no need to be delicate on this Jewish question. You must face them in this country. The Jew should be satisfied here. I was here 47 years ago, your doors were thrown open to the Jews and they were free. Now he has got you absolutely by the throat, that is your reward." 1938. On January 1, Nesta Webster publishes her book, Germany and England, in which she states England is no longer controlled by Britons. We are under the invisible Jewish dictatorship, a dictatorship that can be felt in every sphere of life. On November 7, a Jew, Herschel Greenspan, assassinates Ernst Vogt, a minor official at the German embassy in Paris. In December, Sir Oswald Mosley makes the following revealing statement on the allegation that the Jews are being persecuted in Germany. Supposing that every allegation were true. Supposing it was a fact that a minority in Germany were being treated as the papers allege, was that any reason for millions in Britain to lose their lives in a war with Germany? How many minorities had been badly treated in how many countries since the war without any protest from press or politicians? Why was it only when Jews were the people affected that we had any demand for war with the country concerned? There was only one answer. That today Jewish finance controlled the press and political system of Britain. If you criticize a Jew at home, then jail threatens you. If others touch a Jew abroad, then war threatens them. Rabbi Stephen Wise, the president of both the American Jewish Congress and the World Jewish Congress, puts forward his expectations of the Jews' loyalty to his country of domicile when he makes the following statement to a rally in New York: "I am not an American citizen of the Jewish faith. I am a Jew. I am an American. I have been an American for 63/64 of my life, but I have been a Jew for 4,000 years. Hitler was right in one thing. He calls the Jewish people a race and we are a race." 1939. IG. Farben, the leading producer of chemicals in the world and largest German producer of steel, dramatically increases its production. This increased production is almost exclusively used to arm Germany for World War II. This company is controlled by the Rothschilds and goes on to use Jews and other disaffected peoples as slave labor in concentration camps. Interestingly, I.G. Farben also created Zyklon gas that it will be alleged was used to exterminate Jews. In Germany, Hitler had been doing phenomenally well in turning his country around economically ever since he came to power. He did this by breaking with the Jewish international bankers, and trading by barter, thus bartering the surplus of goods Germany had, with the surplus of goods Germany needed that another country had, without debts being incurred on either side. He, like Abraham Lincoln before him, simply issued what money was needed on the authority of the German government, which was backed by the productivity of the German labor force, and not the empty promises of Jewish international bankers, who in a country without debt, could not function. As a result of this policy, Germany was able to regenerate the social and spiritual life of all its citizens. Put simply, when you are able to help your people, the people in turn help you, as they are of course happy because they are being respected, and are thus able to respect themselves. As a result of a Germany being run for the benefit of the Germans as opposed to for the benefit of Jewish bankers, the citizens of Germany were able to make Germany the most powerful and prosperous state in Europe in only a 7-year period. An example of how Hitler achieved this is recorded in William Gailey Simpson's 1978 book, Which Way Western Man? In which he states the German peasant, who had been on the verge of utter ruin, was given an honored status as the source of the nation's food supply. His land was released from the grip of the Jewish usurer and measures taken to ensure that it should remain permanently in the possession of one family, handed down from father to son. The Jews could not let this continue, as they knew that it would spell the death of their debt-driven money system, and so World War II starts this year, in earnest. This war is about one thing: which money system would survive. This is not a war between Germany and the Allies, it is a war between Germany and the Jewish money power, who are in control of the Allied leadership and use them and their media to propagandize the Allied populace into hatred of the Germans. On May 22, Anthony Crossley, Conservative MP for Oldham, makes the following statement in the House of Commons in relation to the plight of the Arabs as a result of Jewish persecution of the Arabs in Palestine. I do not believe that there has ever been a debate in this House, when this House would have been more justified in calling to the bar an Arab speaker to explain the Arab point of view from the viewpoint of his own countrymen and his own country. There are no Arab members of Parliament. There are no Arab constituents to bring influence to bear upon their members of Parliament. There is no Arab control of newspapers in this country. It is impossible almost to get a pro-Arab letter into the Times. There are in the city no Arab financial houses who control large amounts of finance. There is no Arab control of newspaper advertisements in this country. There are no Arab ex-colonial secretaries who one by one get up and thunder, as they will, at the government during the debate, because of the mistakes they themselves have made in the past. Finally, and I want the colonial secretary to pay special attention to this point, tomorrow night there is to be a broadcast. There is to be himself giving the government point of view. There is to be the honorable member for the Don Valley to advance what is obviously the Zionist point of view. There is to be the honorable member for Carnarvon Boroughs supporting the Zionist point of view. There will not be a supporter of the Arabs who can advance their point of view. On August 15, less than 3 months later, Anthony Crossley will be killed in action off the coast of Denmark, having joined the British Armed Forces soon after the outbreak of World War II. 1940. Hans-Jürgen Kohler, in his book, Inside the Gestapo, states the following: of Maria Anna Gruber, Adolf Hitler's grandmother, a little servant girl ... came to Vienna and became a domestic servant ... at the Rothschild mansion ... and Hitler's unknown grandfather must be probably looked for in this magnificent house. This is reiterated by Walter Langer in his book, The Mind of Hitler, in which he states Adolf's father, our Hitler, was the illegitimate son of Maria Anna Gruber. Maria Anna Gruber was living in Vienna at the time she conceived. At that time she was employed as a servant in the home of Baron Rothschild. As soon as the family discovered her pregnancy, she was sent back home. Where Auer was born. The idea that Hitler could have been a Rothschild illegitimate seems ridiculous. However, it cannot be denied that one of Hitler's major successes had been the emigration of Jews to Palestine, something which was also one of the Rothschilds' main aims. The Rothschilds knew that a country without a population would be meaningless. Furthermore, the propaganda the Jews got out of the Second World War advanced the Rothschilds' program of Jewish supremacism more significantly than any other event in history. This year William Joyce, living in self-imposed exile in Germany, publishes his book, Twilight Over England, in which he states of the Jewish character adamantine materialism, a flair for assuming mysticism outwardly, a supreme contempt for other races, a complete disregard for other people's rights, cleverness in imitation and improvisation, contempt for all labor not associated with high profits, great energy in the cause of money-making, a hatred of all nationalism but their own, a high degree of loyalty to their own family and their own community, an implicit faith in the power to corrupt Gentiles, a brilliant capacity for intrigue, and a pathetic inability to keep pace with any deeper thought or higher idealism are the chief characteristics of the Jewish race. On all these attributes, volumes could be written, but it should suffice to express the resultant of these forces very simply in the following tendencies. 1. An inability to avoid forming a state within a state. 2. Complete inability to view their Gentile hosts as possessing equal rights with their own. 3. Predetermined specialization in all those processes which bring high profit. Hence, in capitalism, almost exclusive preoccupation with finance, distribution, and exchange as distinct from productive industry. Professional work undertaken either for profit or for the sake of social advancement. 4. A natural tendency to utilize social and economic advancement for the purpose of gaining political power. 5. An unholy dread of nationalism as a factor which would draw attention to their racial nature and expose their operations. 6. The deliberate debasement of the standards of culture in the land of their sojourn. 7. The elimination by competition of the Aryan who merely wants to get enough for himself and not more than anybody else. These resultants seem to manifest themselves in every land that the Jew inhabits. 1941. President Roosevelt takes America into the Second World War by refusing to sell Japan any more steel scrap or oil. Japan is in the midst of a war against China, and without that scrap steel and oil, Japan knows they will be unable to continue that war. Roosevelt in turn knows this economic boycott would provoke the Japanese to attack America, which they subsequently did at Pearl Harbor. Interestingly, back in 1939, President Roosevelt tried his hardest to railroad the United States into the war in Europe to accommodate the Jews in the United States, and the world, but when that failed he knew he would have to try a different tactic. That was, of course, what happened at Pearl Harbor. Sir Josiah Stamp, director of the Bank of England during the years 1928 to 1941, makes the following statement with regard to banking: the modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with the flick of the pen they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them and all great fortunes like mine will disappear, and they ought to disappear, for then this would be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue to be slaves of the banks and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. 1942. Prescott Bush, father and grandfather of future American Presidents George Herbert Walker and George W. respectively, has his company seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act. He had been funding Hitler from America, whilst American soldiers were being killed by German soldiers. Interestingly, the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, never criticizes any of the Bush family for this. On May 8, the Jewish Chronicle runs an editorial in which they state boastfully, "We have been at war with Hitler since the first day that he gained power." Indeed, on December 3, Chaim Weizmann, president of the World Jewish Congress, makes the following statement in New York: "We are not denying and we are not afraid to confess, this war is our war and that it is waged for the liberation of Jewry. Stronger than all fronts together is our front, that of Jewry. We are not only giving this war our financial support on which the entire war production is based. We are not only providing our full propaganda power, which is the moral energy that keeps this war going. The guarantee of victory is predominantly based on weakening the enemy forces, on destroying them within their own country, within the resistance. And we are the Trojan horse in the enemy's fortress. Thousands of Jews living in Europe constitute the principal factor in the destruction of our enemy. There, our front is a fact and the most valuable aid for victory." Leonard Goldenson founds the ABC television network and as president oversees ABC's success. 1943. February 18, Zionist, Isaac Greenbaum, head of the Jewish Agency Rescue Committee, in a speech to the Zionist Executive Council states, "If I am asked, could you give from the United Jewish Appeal, monies to rescue Jews, I say, no, and I say again no." He goes on to state, "One cow in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Poland." This is not a surprise, as Zionism and Nazism had similar aims. They both wanted the Jews out of Germany. However, the Zionists were not interested in any Jews that didn't want to go to Palestine and thought it would be more beneficial to ensure these Jews be placed in concentration camps, in order to frighten Jews worldwide into fleeing to Palestine, which they touted as the only state where they could be safe. 1944. On November 6, Lord Moyne, British minister resident in the Middle East, is assassinated in Cairo by two members of the Jewish terrorist group, the Stern Gang, led by future Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir. He is also responsible for an assassination attempt against Harold McMichael, the High Commissioner of the British Mandate of Palestine, this same year. Interestingly, he also masterminds another successful assassination this year against the United Nations representative in the Middle East, Count Folke Bernadotte, although he had secured the release of 21,000 prisoners from German camps during World War II, was seen by Yitzhak Shamir and his terrorist collaborators as an anti-Zionist. In Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, initially called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development or IBIRD, the name, World Bank, was not actually adopted until 1975, are approved with full United States participation. The principal architects of the Bretton Woods system, and hence the IMF, are Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes. Interestingly, Harry Dexter White, who died in 1946, would be identified as a Soviet spy whose code name was Jurist, on October 16, 1950, in an FBI memo, and as for John Maynard Keynes, he is British. What the IMF and World Bank essentially did, was repeat on a world scale what the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 had established in the United States. They created a banking cartel comprising the world's privately owned central banks, which gradually assumed the power to dictate credit policies to the banks of all nations. In the same way, the Federal Reserve Act authorized the creation of a new national fiat currency called Federal Reserve Notes. The IMF has been given the authority to issue a world fiat money called Special Drawing Rights, or SDRs. member nations would end up being pressured into making their currencies fully exchangeable for SDRs. The IMF is controlled by its board of governors, which are either the heads of different central banks, or the heads of the various national treasury departments who are dominated by their central banks. Also, the voting power in the IMF gives the United States and the United Kingdom, the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, effective overall control of it. 1945. On July 16, the first successful test of the atomic bomb occurs at the Trinity site, 200 miles south of Los Alamos. Its creator, J. Robert Oppenheimer, a Rothschild, states in Wonder I Am Become Death, the destroyer of worlds. He is right. Within the month, subsequent detonations over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan result in the deaths of 140,000 people in Hiroshima and 80,000 in Nagasaki. The end of World War II. It is reported that the Rothschild-controlled IG. Farben plants were specifically not targeted in the bombing raids on Germany. Interestingly, at the end of the war, whilst parts of Germany lay in ruins, they were found to have only sustained 15% damage. The tribunals held at the end of the Second World War, to investigate Nazi war crimes, censor any materials recording Western assistance to Hitler, such as that of Prescott Bush. The Rothschilds take a giant step towards their goal of world domination when their third overt attempt at world government, the Second League of Nations, which is called the United Nations, is approved this year. 1946. On January 3, William Joyce is executed. As he awaits his execution, he makes his last statement: in death as in this life, I defy the Jews who caused this last war, and I defy the power of darkness which they represent. I warn the British people against the aggressive imperialism of the Soviet Union. May Britain be great once again, and, in the hour of the greatest danger to the West, may the standard of the Hagenkreuz, swastika, be raised from the dust, crowned with the historic words, "Ihr habt doch gesiegt." You have actually won. I am proud to die for my ideals, and I am sorry for the sons of Britain who have died without knowing why. On February 12, the British security services receive a telegram from a reliable source in Palestine claiming that the Stern Gang are training members to go to England to assassinate members of His Majesty's government, especially Mr. Bevin, British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin. On July 22, the future Prime Minister of Israel, Ashkenazi Jew, David Ben-Gurion, orders another future Prime Minister of Israel, Ashkenazi Jew, Menachem Begin, to carry out a terrorist attack on the King David Hotel in Palestine, to try and drive out the British. As a result of this, 91 people are killed, most of them civilians, 41 Arabs, 28 British, 17 Jews, and 5 others. Around 45 people are injured. When he was asked by prominent journalist, Russell Warren Howe, if he considered himself the father of terrorism in the Middle East, Menachem Begin proudly replied, "No, in the entire whole world." 60 years later, on July 22, 2006, another future Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, together with many other Israeli government representatives, dedicate a plaque at the site of this terrorist atrocity, which cites the bombers as freedom fighters to be admired by Israel. Just to put the gravity of the attack on the King David Hotel into perspective, it was at the time the biggest death toll as a result of single terrorist action ever, and was only surpassed nearly 40 years later by the bombing of the United States barracks in Beirut in 1982. The Bank of England is nationalised, which means that the state acquired all the shares in the Bank of England, which now belong to the Treasury and are held in trust by the Treasury solicitor. However, as the government has no money to pay for the shares, they give the current secret shareholders of the Bank of England government stocks instead of money for their shares. This means that although the state now receives the operating profits of the bank, This gain is largely offset by the fact that the government now has to pay interest on the new stocks it has issued to pay for the shares. So, although the Bank of England is now state-owned, the fact is that the British money supply is still almost entirely in private hands, with 97% of it being in the form of interest-bearing loans of one sort or another, created by private commercial banks. As a result of this, the bank is largely controlled and run by those from the world of commercial banking and conventional economics. The members of the Court of Directors, who set policy and oversee its functions, are drawn almost entirely from the world of banks, insurance, economists and big business, and of course a Rothschild continues to sit on its board. Although the Bank of England is called a central bank, it is now essentially a regulatory body that supports and oversees the existing system. It is sometimes referred to as the lender of last resort, insofar as one of its functions as the banker's bank is to support any bank or financial institution that gets into difficulties and suffers a run on its liquid assets. Interestingly, in these circumstances, it is not obliged to disclose details of any such measures, the reason being so as to avoid a crisis in confidence. 1947. The British, who prior to World War II declared that there would be no more immigration of Jews to Palestine in order to protect the Palestinians from their acts of terror against both them and British soldiers, transfer control of Palestine to the United Nations. The United Nations resolved to have Palestine partitioned into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem to remain as an international zone to be enjoyed by all religious faiths. This transfer is scheduled to take place on May 15, 1948. However, just to put into perspective who controls the United Nations, please be aware that the UN had no right to give Arab property to anyone, as indeed even though the Jews owned only 6% of Palestine at the time, Resolution 181 granted the Jews 57% of the land, leaving the Arabs, who at that time had 94%, with only 43%. Terror attacks against the British in Palestine continued. In fact, during the summer, 3 Jewish terrorists, Jacob Weiss, Mrnakar, and Avshalom Habib, found guilty of an attack on Acre Jail on May 4, were to be hanged. At the same time, the airgun terrorist gang headed by future Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, were holding 2 British sergeants, Mervyn P's and Clifford Martin, as hostages for the 3 Jewish terrorists. Indeed, Begin stated, "We will hang the British sergeants at exactly the same time as our men die." The executions of the Jewish terrorists took place, and the British sergeants were found executed also, hanging from 2 eucalyptus trees. Captain D. H. Galati of 23rd Field Squadron, Royal Engineers, cut down one of the bodies only to be seriously injured by an explosion. Unsatisfied with killing these British soldiers, the Jews had booby-trapped their corpses. Interestingly, a popular British newspaper, the Daily Express, carried as their lead story a large picture of these soldiers strung up in the trees, but this front page has now been deleted from the Daily Express archives. The owner of the Daily Express, Richard Desmond, a Jewish pornographer. Information collected by the Anti-Defamation League, AD, in its spy operations on United States citizens is used by the House Select Committee on Un-American Activities. Subcommittee Chair, Claire Hoffman, dismisses the ADL's reports on suspected communists as hearsay. In October, Ashkenazi Jew, Albert Einstein, writes an open letter to the United Nations encouraging all national governments to be destroyed to make way for a one-world government to be run by the UN. In his diary of July 21, President Harry S. Truman makes the following entry: "The Jews have no sense of proportion, nor do they have any judgment on world affairs. The Jews, I find, are very, very selfish. They care not how many Estonians, Latvians, Finns, Poles, Yugoslavs or Greeks get murdered or mistreated as, post-war, displaced persons, as long as the Jews get special treatment. Yet when they have power, physical, financial or political. Neither Hitler nor Stalin has anything on them for cruelty or mistreatment to the underdog. 1948. In the spring of this year, the Rothschilds bribed President Harry S. Truman, 33rd President of the United States. 1945, 1953, to recognize Israel as a sovereign state with $2 million which they give to him on his campaign train. At midnight on May 14, the State of Israel is officially proclaimed in Tel Aviv. 11 minutes later President Truman declares the United States as the first foreign nation to recognize it. Truman later confides to friends that he wanted to recognize the Jewish state in their first hour of its birth, yet when pressed by journalists on this subject, he refuses to discuss his pro-Jewish stance any further. The flag of Israel is unveiled. The emblem on the flag is a blue-colored version of the Rothschild, red hexagram. It has a blue border at the top and the bottom which represents the Nile and Euphrates rivers. This is put there to make the Jewish territorial ambitions very clear, and Israel in accordance with its biblical borders. This would of course mean the inclusion into Israel of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and parts of Saudi Arabia. This use of the Rothschild hexagram is disguised as it is referred to in the Rothschild media as a Star of David. However, it is clear to anyone with knowledge of esoteric symbolism that this hexagram was used in the ancient mystery religions as the symbol of Mush, described as a demon of unwilling sacrifice, and is also interestingly the name of the stone owl, the elite worship at Bohemian Grove, and Ashtaroth, described as the Lord Treasurer of Hell. Due to the fact it is made up of 6 lines, has 6 triangular sectors and 6 points, it is commonly regarded as a symbol of Satan. Interestingly, the hexagram is also used to represent Saturn, which has been identified as the esoteric name for Satan. Would this not indicate that anyone killed in the name of Israel is actually a sacrifice to their god, Satan? Furthermore, the Jewish Sabbath is on Saturday, which was originally known as Saturn's Day. So, to recap, the hexagram on the Israeli flag represents the number of the beast 666. It is an ancient representation of Satan, also known as Saturn, and the Jewish weekly religious day is Saturn's Day. In the early hours of April 19, 132 Jewish terrorists from the Argon Gang, led by future Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and the Stern Gang, led by future Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, brutally massacre 200 men, women and children as they are sleeping peacefully in the Arab village of Deir Yassin. In an effort to prevent outside observers discovering the brutality of their war crimes, they try to burn some of the bodies, but when that proves unsatisfactory, they stuff some in a well to hide them from the Red Cross representatives who arrive on the scene the next day and would subsequently tell the world. Indeed, reports from survivors can be found in their Report of the Criminal Investigation Division, a Palestine government document labeled, No. 179/110/17/GS dated April 13, 15, and 16, 1948, in which British interrogating officer, Assistant Inspector General Richard Catling states the recording of statements is hampered also by the hysterical state of the women, who often break down many times, whilst the statement is being recorded. There is, however, no doubt that many sexual atrocities were committed by the attacking Jews. Many young schoolgirls were raped and later slaughtered. Older women were also molested. One story is current concerning a case in which a young girl was literally torn in two. Many infants were butchered and killed. I also saw one old woman who gave her age as 104, who had been severely beaten about the head with rifle butts. Women had bracelets torn from their arms and rings from their fingers, and parts of some women's ears were severed in order to remove earrings. As a result of this, the Jews go on to detest the Red Cross, which is why, in the future, they always block them entering any territory in which they are involved in conflict, for as long as possible, to give them time to clean up evidence of their criminal acts. Following the United Nations transfer of Palestine to an independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state on May 15, the Israelis launched another military assault on the Arabs, today known as Palestinians, with blaring loudspeakers on their trucks informing the Arabs that if they do not flee immediately, they will be slaughtered. 800,000 Arabs, with the recent memory of the Deir Yassin massacre at the forefront of their minds, flee in panic. They ask for help from neighboring Arab states, but those states do not get involved as they are no match for the Israelis, whose up-to-date military hardware had been supplied by the Jewish Stalinist regime in Russia. Following this series of Jewish genocidal war crimes, the Jews now control 78% of the former Palestine, as opposed to the 57% that had already been given to them illegally by the Jewish-controlled United Nations. The Arabs, many of them Christians, would never be paid compensation for their homes, property and businesses stolen from them during this genocide, and as a result these people end up in slum refugee cities of tents. Furthermore, at least half of the Arabs, in a desperate hurry to flee with their lives, leave their birth certificates behind. The State of Israel then pass a law that only those Arabs who are able to prove their citizenship are allowed to return to their land, now known as Israel, which meant these 400,000 Arabs could not return and lost all the property they had left there. Ashkenazi Jew, David Ben-Gurion, one of the father-founders of Israel and its first prime minister, candidly describes Jewish aims in his diary entry of May 21 as follows: "The Achilles heel of the Arab coalition is the Lebanon. Muslim supremacy in this country is artificial and can easily be overthrown. A Christian state ought to be set up there, with its southern frontier on the river Litani. We would sign a treaty of alliance with this state. Thus, when we have broken the strength of the Arab Legion and bombed Amman, we could wipe out Transjordan. After that Syria would fall. And if Egypt still dared to make war on us, we would bomb Port Said, Alexandria and Cairo. We should thus end the war and would have put paid to Egypt, Assyria and Chaldea on behalf of our ancestors." On October 1, Commander Anton Muller and his second-in-command, Camille Lackout, send the following memo from Vienna to all interested parties. Military Police Service Circular Letter No. 31/48. Vienna, 1 October 1948. 10th Dispatch. The Allied Commissions of Inquiry have so far established that no people were killed by poison gas in the following concentration camps: Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, Flossenburg, Gross-Rosen, Mauthausen and its satellite camps, Natzweiler, Neuengamme, Niederhagen, Wolfsburg, Ravensbrück, Sachsenhausen, Stuthof, Theresienstadt. In those cases, it has been possible to prove that confessions had been extracted by torture, and that testimonies were false. This must be taken into account when conducting investigations and interrogations with respect to war crimes. The result of this investigation should be brought to the cognizance of former concentration camp inmates who at the time of the hearings testified about the murder of people, especially Jews, with poison gas in those concentration camps. Should they insist on their statements, charges are to be brought against them for making false statements. On February 3, Collie Knickerbocker, reporting in his Society News column in the Hearst Press, which appeared in the New York Journal American, stated on the subject of Rothschild Jacob Sif: "Today it is estimated by Jacob's grandson, John Sif, a prominent member of New York society, that the old man sank about $20 million for the final triumph of Bolshevism in Russia." On October 1, Mao Zedong declares the founding of the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. He is funded by Rothschild, created communism in Russia and handled by the following Rothschild agents: Solomon Adler, a former United States Treasury official who was a Soviet spy; Israel Epstein, the son of a Jewish Bolshevik imprisoned by the Tsar in Russia for trying to foment a revolution there, and Frank Coe, a leading official of the Rothschild-owned IMF. In December 16th's Jewish Chronicle, Israeli Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, is quoted with the following statement: "Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel and world Jewry, it aspires to become the spiritual center of the world." 1950. Figures reveal that as planned by the Rothschilds, every nation involved in World War II greatly multiplied their debt, bringing them further and further under Jewish control. Between 1940 and 1950, United States federal debt went from $43 billion to $257 billion, a 598% increase. During that same period, Japanese debt increased by 1,348%, French debt increased by 583%, and Canadian debt increased by 417%. James Paul Warburg, appearing before the Senate on 7th February, arrogantly states, "We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent." Thus the Rothschilds get to work on their plan for global government, which starts with a three-step plan to centralize the economic systems of the entire world. These steps are: 1. Central bank domination of national economies worldwide. 2. Centralized regional economies through superstates such as the European Union, and regional trade unions such as NAFTA. 3. Centralization of the world economy through a world central bank, a world currency, and ending national independence through the abolition of all trade tariffs by treaties such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. Israel passes their law of return, guaranteeing every person born of a Jewish mother, throughout the world, the right to dwell in the State of Israel. However, the Palestinians, who had lived there for 1,300 years, are denied that right. John David, former chief of the Justice Department's Internal Security Section, notes that the Israeli intelligence service is the second most active in the United States after the Soviets, both of which are of course controlled by Jews. 1951. On April 1, the Israeli secret intelligence agency, the Mossad, which will go on to terrorize the world, is formed. The Mossad soon takes control of its American arm, the Anti-Defamation League. The motto of the Mossad is probably the most disturbing secret service motto in the world. It is, by way of deception, "Thou shalt do war." 1952. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion oversees a project in which a generation of Sephardic Jews in Israel are weeded out from their Ashkenazi counterparts at school, and, to avoid suspicion by the parents, these Sephardic children are then taken on school trips. On these supposed trips, they actually receive a radiation treatment, purportedly for ringworm infection. At this time, the permitted maximum X-ray dose was 0.5 rad, yet these children received 350 rad, directly to their heads. As a result, at least 6,000 die shortly afterwards, with those remaining developing severe conditions such as cancers, epilepsy, and psychosis. Those that are still alive today, and many of their children and grandchildren, are stricken with genetic diseases and malignant tumors. This is an attempt to genocide the Sephardic Jews, who are an underclass in Israel and even referred to by many Ashkenazi Jews as niggers. On April 23, during a debate on immigration law, Congressman John Rankin makes the following statement to the House on the subject of the Jews, which is recorded in the congressional record. They whine about discrimination. Do you know who is being discriminated against? The white Christian people of America. The ones who created this nation. Communism is racial. A racial minority seized control in Russia and in all her satellite countries, such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and many other countries I could name. They have been run out of practically every country in Europe in the years gone by, and if they keep stirring race trouble in this country and trying to force their communistic program on the Christian people of America, there is no telling what will happen to them here. 1953. Dwight Eisenhower, who in the 1915 West Point Military Academy graduating class yearbook is referred to as a terrible Swedish Jew, is elected President of the United States. On June 19, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are executed in America for espionage. They had been caught supplying secrets regarding atomic bomb manufacture to the Soviet Union, a country they had great affinity for, having met at a Young Communist League meeting in America, and also being Jewish, of course. N.M. Rothschild and Sons found the British Newfoundland Corporation Limited to develop 60,000 square miles of land in Newfoundland, Canada, which comprises a power station to harness the power of the Hamilton, later renamed Churchill, Falls. At the time this was the largest construction project ever to be undertaken by a private company. 1954. The Levin Affair. Israeli agents recruit Egyptian citizens of Jewish descent to bomb Western targets in Egypt, and plant evidence to frame Arabs, in an apparent attempt to upset American/Egyptian relations. Israeli Defense Minister, Ashkenazi Jew, Pinchas Levin is eventually removed from office, though many think real responsibility lies with David Ben-Gurion. This is the first known use of Jews who look like Arabs, being used by the Jews to carry out terrorist attacks that they then blame on the Arabs, and is an example of how their Secret Service motto, by way of deception, "Thou shalt do war," works in practice. A hidden microphone planted by the Israelis is discovered in the office of the United States ambassador in Tel Aviv. In Holland, the Bilderberg Group meets for the first time at the Bilderberg Hotel in Arnhem. The Bilderberg Group is a Rothschild-founded international organization of approximately 100-200 influential people, mostly politicians and business people, who meet annually, and in secret, to carry out the bidding of the Jewish world power behind the scenes. Regulars at these meetings put forward the forthcoming global policy, which delegates report back to their respective governments who then implement this policy. Bilderberg meetings are also used so that Rothschild, David Rockefeller and Jewish frontmen such as Henry Kissinger, can check out potential leaders of countries, and decide whether or not they want them as leaders of said countries. For example, Bill Clinton was there in 1991, Tony Blair was there in 1993, and Angela Merkel was there in 2005. Also Rands, who didn't pass the Bilderberg audition, such as future Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, and former leader of the Conservative Party, William Hague, were there in 1991 and 1998 respectively. 1955. The Israeli government carries out the clandestine terrorist bombings of a number of American facilities in Cairo, with the aim of making the Americans believe the Egyptians are responsible for them, in order to damage relations between the United States and Egypt. Edmond de Rothschild founds Compagnie Financière, Paris. 1956. On October 28, Menachem Begin, he of the infamous Deir Yassin massacre and who would go on to be a future Prime Minister of Israel, states at a Tel Aviv conference: "You Israelis, you should never become lenient if you kill your enemies. You shall have no pity on them until we have destroyed their so-called Arab culture, on the ruins of which we shall build our own civilization." Telephone taps are found connected to telephones in the residence of the United States military attaché in Tel Aviv. 1957. During a joint British, Israeli, and French invasion of the Suez Canal, Ariel Sharon commands units which murder Egyptian prisoners of war, as well as civilian Sudanese workers who the Jews had captured. A total of 273 unarmed prisoners are executed and dumped into mass graves. This story is suppressed for nearly 40 years until it breaks in the August 16, 1995, edition of the London Daily Telegraph. James de Rothschild dies, and it is reported, by the Rothschild-owned media, that he bequeaths a large sum of money to the State of Israel to pay for the construction of their parliament building, the Knesset. He states that the Knesset should be a symbol, in the eyes of all men, of the permanence of the State of Israel. On page 219 of his book, Tales of the British Aristocracy, L.G. Bine, the editor of Burke's Peerage, states that the Jews ... have made themselves so closely connected with the British peerage that the two classes are unlikely to suffer loss which is not mutual. So closely linked are the Jews and the lords that a blow against the Jews in this country would not be possible without injuring the aristocracy also. Maurice de Rothschild dies in Paris. 1959. In February, crypto-Jew, Fidel Castro, declares himself Prime Minister of Cuba, after leading a communist revolution there. 1960. In his book, Impact, Essays on Ignorance and the Decline of American Civilization, published this year, Ezra Pound states a nation that will not get itself into debt drives the usurers to fury. 1962. On June 25, prayer is banned from the American public schools system following a Supreme Court decision. This court decision was based upon a case brought by a New York Jew named Engel in the case Engel v. Vidali. Senator Robert Byrd, a Democrat from West Virginia, states of this decision, can it be that we too are ready to embrace the foul concepts of atheism? Somebody is tampering with America's soul. I leave it to you who that somebody is. De Rothschild FREs establishes Intel as an umbrella company for all their mineral mining interests. Frederick Morton publishes his book, The Rothschilds, in which he states though they control scores of industrial, commercial, mining and tourist corporations, not one bears the name Rothschild. Being private partnerships, the family houses never need to, and never do, publish a single public balance sheet, or any other report of their financial condition. 1963. On June 4, President John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States 1961-1963, signs Executive Order 11,110 which returns to the United States government the power to issue currency, without going through the Rothschilds-owned Federal Reserve. Less than 6 months later, on November 22, President Kennedy is assassinated by the Rothschilds for the same reason as they assassinated President Abraham Lincoln in 1865. He wanted to print American money for the American people, as opposed to for the benefit of a money-grabbing, war-mongering foreign elite. This Executive Order 11,110 is actually rescinded by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, an alleged crypto-Jew, the 36th President of the United States 1963 to 1969. In one of the first acts he carries out as United States President. Another, and probably the primary, reason for Kennedy's assassination is, however, the fact that he made it quite clear to Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion that under no circumstances would he agree to Israel becoming a nuclear state. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz on February 5, 1999, in a review of Avner Cohen's book, Israel and the Bomb, states the following on this subject: the murder of American President John F. Kennedy brought to an abrupt end the massive pressure being applied by the U.S. administration on the government of Israel to discontinue the nuclear program. The book implied that, had Kennedy remained alive, it is doubtful whether Israel would today have a nuclear option. A point of interest here is that Kennedy's wife, Jackie Kennedy, was Jewish. This is revealed by Gore Vidal, in his autobiography, Palimpsest, a memoir. It turns out Vidal's stepfather, Hugh Auchincloss, subsequently wed Jackie Kennedy's mother, Janet Bouvier. This story was also covered in the New York Times on November 9, 1995. Also, for those of you who saw the Oliver Stone's JFK, which came up with a different conclusion with regard to the reasons for Kennedy's assassination, you may wish to know that Oliver Stone is Jewish. Finally, there is some speculation that the Kennedy family were indeed a Jewish family who had settled in Ireland some generations before, although this is unconfirmed. Edmond de Rothschild establishes La Compagnie Financière Edmond de Rothschild, LCF, in Switzerland as a venture capital house. This later develops into an investment bank and asset management company with many affiliates. He also marries his wife Nadine and they have a son, Benjamin de Rothschild. On January 10th of this year, the 45 goals of the Communist Manifesto are stated in the United States Congress, by A.S. Herlong Jr. of Florida, and therefore formed the congressional record of the day. Below is that list, which is important to study today to help you understand whether you live in a democracy, a republic, or under communism, which is of course, the control of the masses by Jewish interests. 1. U.S. acceptance of coexistence as the only alternative to atomic war. 2. U.S. willingness to capitulate in preference to engaging in atomic war. 3. Develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. 4. Permit free trade between all nations regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. 5. Extension of long-term loans to Russia and Soviet satellites. 6. Provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination. 7. Grant recognition of Red China. Admission of Red China to the UN. 8. Set up East and West Germany